Thank you all for joining us this evening. For anyone that is in a position to do so or comfortable doing so, please turn on those cameras so I get to talk to your beautiful smiling faces and not a bunch of squares. And we are going to go ahead and dive right in to today's session. We're going to start with contracts today. For those of you who have joined us in the past, contracts is the single largest subset of questions on your exam. So it's a great place to seek mastery initially because more questions will come regarding contracts than anything else. Contracts, practice of real estate, and general principles of agency make up almost 50% of the questions on the exam. So if you are practicing, as you all should be, doing some practice problems and going back over some of your courses, make sure you're spending time in those three. I always use the example that property management and leasing is going to have 1 to 2 questions, and you're going to have 14 to 15 on contracts alone. So we always like to start there, as it is the bulk of the exam. So if it also is your first time joining us, we run through practice questions. What I'll do is I'll read the question, I'll read all the answers, and then I just need you to put an A, B, C, or a D in the chat box. And then whatever the group thinks it is, we'll go with that. If everyone gets it right, awesome, we move on. If we're a little bit iffy on it or we all got it wrong, we'll stop and we'll talk about the concepts or the underlying principles that we need to focus on. So don't be shy. If you don't know the answer, you don't understand the question, just put that in the chat as well. And then as always, I like to ask, is there anybody who's testing in the next 7 days? Is there anybody who's going to be testing prior to us getting back together? If you are, please drop that in the chat as well, and we will let you pick our next section after we get through contracts. All right, let's get it underway. Question number 1, a broker deposits a buyer's $500 earnest money check into the broker's personal checking account. The broker is guilty of A, capitalization, B, commingling, C, condemnation, or D, cooperation. Which is it? All right. B's flood the chat box, and that is correct. So commingling is where you mix funds, personal funds, and broker trust account funds. All right, next question. Which has occurred when a contract has been rescinded and each party returns to the other any consideration that was tendered? Is it A, restoration, B, replacement, C, reconciliation, or D, restitution? All right, we've got some C's and some D's. So it looks like we got more D's than anything else. So we'll go with that. And D is going to be correct. Restitution is what takes place after the rescission of a contract. All the obligations are terminated. Reconciliation is part of the appraisal process. So they're going to use a few different methods in the appraisal process and then reconcile them to get a final appraisal number. Restoration is refers to constructing improvements to the exact same physical status and appearance as before. So restoration would be, hey, this Italian marble countertop was destroyed. It's restored whenever it is the same Italian marble or similar, whereas replacement is, you could replace the countertop with any type of marble, right? It's not that specific one. So restoration and replacement are both construction terms. Reconciliation is an part of the appraisal process. So restitution was the correct answer. All right, question number 3. If a broker receives 2 offers for the same house at the same time, one from the agent of a cooperating broker and another from his own agent, the broker should A, reject both offers, B, submit the cooperating broker's offer first, C, submit both offers, or D, submit his agent's offer to the seller first. All right, the C's are flooding the chat box, and that is correct. Present all offers in no preference or no specific order, regardless of whether they are someone from your brokerage or a cooperating brokerage. Question number 4, if the landlord and the real estate manager of a national retailer both execute a lease and the corporation fails to occupy the premises, what might prevent the landlord from enforcing the terms of the contract? A, no corporate resolution granting signing authority to the real estate manager was approved. B, the real estate manager had the authority to make the deal. C, the economy declined and the retailer was closing stores. Or D, the broker did not have a written listing. All right, a lot of A's in the chat box, and that's going to be correct. You'll probably get one of these questions on your exam. It is, quite simply, signing authority for leases and things of that nature has to be granted through corporate resolution. If that didn't exist, then that person doesn't have the capacity to enter into a lease with the landlord. All right, question number 5. A condition or contingency in a contract can be waived by the A, broker for the seller, B, party benefiting from the condition or contingency, C, lender's appraiser, or D, broker for the buyer. Who gets to waive conditions and contingencies? All right, everyone throwing B's in the chat, and that is correct. So the party benefiting from this. So think about it this way, guys. Whenever you enter into a real estate contract, you are very likely to have what's called an inspection contingency written into that contract. Our contract has one, as does nearly every other brokerage's standard contract. The party benefiting from the inspection is the buyer, right? So the buyer can waive the inspection and say, I don't want to have an inspection. And that is, that's their prerogative, right? Because they're benefiting from knowing what's wrong with the property. The seller can't waive it because they're the ones, that are potentially harmed by the inspection. And so they don't get to waive that. So it's always the party that benefits. All righty, question number 6, a listing agent shows a buyer a home. The buyer then fills out an offer to buy the home, which the listing agent takes and explains to the sellers. The sellers like the offer and sign their acceptance. They then hand the accepted offer to their agent with the instructions to deliver the accepted contract to the buyer. At this point, all of the following statements are true regarding this offer, except, so in this situation, we're looking for which one of these is not true. A, the sellers have not relinquished control of the acceptance. B, the listing agent now has possession of the accepted offer. C, the accepted offer doesn't need to be communicated or delivered to the buyer. Or D, the offer was accepted by the sellers. All right, you guys are on top of this one. C is the answer, and that is correct. They have technically not relinquished control of the acceptance. That's one where we would see people sometimes answer A, but since it has not been delivered to the buyer, they can call up their agent and say, you know what, we're actually not going to do it, and nothing bad is going to happen. But the accepted offer does need to be communicated and delivered to the buyer. All right, question number 7. A buyer makes an offer subject to reviewing the results of a home inspection. After the inspection, the buyer is ready to move forward with the deal. Which does the buyer's agent need to do at this point? A, prepare an addendum removing the contingency. B, require that the sellers make recommended repairs listed on the inspection report. C, recommend to the buyer to get an appraisal of the property. Or D, advise the buyer to renegotiate the purchase price. All right, here we go. So a lot of A's in there, and that is going to be correct. Now, all of these are options, right? But they, what we get from the question is that the buyer's ready to move forward. So yes, you could do all of these things after getting an inspection done, but pretty simple. The buyers are saying we're ready to move forward, and so you just need to remove that inspection contingency. All right, question number 8. If the buyer in contract for deed, or also known as a land contract, has paid less than 20% of the purchase price, defaults, the seller may A, initiate forfeiture proceedings, B, wait 10 days and then sell to someone else, C, file a judgment lien, or D, initiate foreclosure proceedings. What do we think we're going to see happen here with a land contract? All right. Well, everyone seems to feel pretty strongly that it's A, and that is correct. So based on the information that we have, we know that this would in fact be forfeiture proceedings. Foreclosure proceedings take place under normal mortgaged properties. A bilateral contract is one that A, binds both parties to an agreement, B, is void, C, is unenforceable, or D, binds only one party to an agreement. Yep. Just think bi as in binoculars, bicycle, or yeah, those are probably two good ones, meaning both or two. So both parties have an option here. Unilateral, unicycle, is just one of the parties is bound to the agreement. All right, a buyer made an earnest money deposit of $500 on a $40,000 house, but withdrew the offer before the seller accepted it. The broker should dispose of the buyer's earnest money by A, keeping it as a part of his commission, B, giving it to the seller, C, returning it to the buyer, or D, paying it to the court. That's right, guys. Returning it to the buyer. It never stops being the buyer's money until they are under contract, right? So earnest money prior to the contract being accepted by both parties is the possession. It's the buyer's, right? It's the buyer's money. And then when the deal is closed, it becomes the seller's money. And then every issue you could ever possibly have in real estate is very likely to be in the middle, where it's effectively nobody's money. And so because the seller, we were talking about before the seller accepted it, still the buyer's money, just return to the buyer. All right. Well. Okay. Question number 11. Which are liquidated damages? A, a cashier's check used to empty a broker's trust account. B, an amount the parties agree on to settle a potential dispute. C, paper money that has been soaked for 24 hours. Or D, losses suffered when liquidating a business. What, pray tell, are liquidated damages? All right, B is getting the most votes, and that is right. It's the amount that all parties agree to end a dispute. All right, the scope and purpose of a real estate contract does not include A, personal property, B, real property, C, a home, or D, fixtures. What is not in the scope and purpose of a real estate contract? That's exactly right. Personal property. That should show up on a bill of sale. Show up as a bill on a bill of sale. All right. Earnest money is best described as A, the money deposited by the purchaser with the broker/seller to pay for expenses of examining the title. B, the commission paid to the broker. C, good faith money deposited by the purchaser at the time of signing an offer. Or D, the consideration for the sale of a property. And you all have just loaded up the chat box with C's. And that is correct. It is good faith money deposited by the purchaser. A couple other questions that you might get around earnest money is, what is the required amount? There is no required amount of earnest money. You do not have to give earnest money. It would just weaken the offer by the client. All right, question number 14. A buyer makes an offer to buy a house for $50,000. The seller does not accept the offer, but responds that he will accept no less than $55,000 for the house. The seller just made a bilateral enforceable contract, B, a unilateral enforceable contract, C, an option, or D, a counter offer. All right, the D's flood the chat box, and that is correct. A new and contrary offer was made in reply is received as a counter offer. And you will also get a question on the exam, or something will show up where it says effectively that if the seller changes their mind, can they go back and accept the $50,000 offer? And understand that in a counter offer, two things are taking place. One, the initial offer is being rejected. It's dead. It cannot be resurrected. That offer is off the table and terminated. And then a new offer is being put forth. So a counter offer is those two things happening at the same time. All right, which is not an essential element of a real estate contract? A, valuable consideration. B, lawful and possible objectives. C, good consideration. Or D, offer and acceptance. All right, a lot of C's in there, and that's correct. Good consideration are things like love and kindness, which are good, but they are not necessarily valuable in the sense of a real estate contract. Valuable consideration needs to be money, property, jewelry, physical goods that have a value. So valuable consideration is required, not good. All right, guys, great job there. Great job all around. Before we move on to the next session, is there any segment that anyone is particularly passionate about doing? And I want to give first right of refusal to anybody that is testing in the next 7 days. If you are testing the next 7 days, or you have your exam scheduled, please throw that date in the chat box. Throw that date in the chat box. I am seeing principles of real estate and law. I think that we could get to both of those. Where is general principles of agency or practice of real estate? Sky, which one of those were you looking for, since it looks like we kind of blended them together? Sky, did you want practice of real estate or general principles of agency? Which one were you interested in? Practice of real estate. Here we go. All right. Now, this is another big one on your exam, so this is a good place for us to spend some time. And then, Imani, we will get to law following this one. All right. Which is not an exemption under the Federal Fair Housing Act? This is not an exemption. A, private club that without the aid of a broker allows members to rent or occupy rooms. B, a single family home sold by its owner. C, a church selling its church grounds with the help of a broker. Or D, an owner occupied dwelling of 4 units or less being sold without the aid of a broker. All right, guys, C it is, and that is correct. An exemption exists for properties for sale by owner. Because there's a broker involved, no exemptions are granted. Question number 2, a broker or salesperson's refusal to cooperate with other brokers because of race is prohibited by A, the Civil Rights Act of 1844, B, the Presidential Fair Housing Act of 1973, C, the Federal Fair Housing Law of 1968, or D, Executive Order 1068? All righty then. C's, lots of C's moving through here, and that is correct. There is no such thing as the Civil Rights Act of 1844. It was of 1866. And so the Federal Fair Housing Law of 1968 disallows discrimination by sellers and salespeople or brokers for race, color, religion, sex, national orientation, disability, and familial status. All right, gang. What factor does not contribute to a buyer's market? A, low affordable construction costs for both materials and labor. B, increased local job layoffs. C, people moving away from the area. Or D, limited new construction. Which does not contribute to a buyer's market? A buyer's market is the one where the buyers have the advantage. It is better to be a buyer in a buyer's market versus a seller's market, which is where it is good to be a seller and bad to be a buyer, or tough. All right, lots of D's in there, and that is correct. Limited new construction is going to limit the number of houses on the market or the number of houses becoming available, which is a limitation on supply. When supply is low, it is a seller's market. All right, which could a real estate agent lawfully prepare? A, a lease with an option. B, a land contract. C, none of these. Or D, a general warranty deed. What can a real estate agent legally, lawfully prepare? Remember, prepare means create. And so, as many of you have identified, the answer is none of these. General warranty deed, a land contract, or a lease with option must all be prepared by an attorney at law, which you are not. A real estate license does not make you a lawyer. It makes you a real estate salesperson. That stuff needs to be done by lawyers. If you do it, it is considered unauthorized practice of law, and therefore you could potentially lose your license. Which, you're not spending your Monday evenings with me to study for an exam to go ahead and try and cut a corner in 6 months and lose your license. I know that. All right, question number 5. In real estate matters, open housing means A, model house in a subdivision development. B, a social party in a new subdivision. C, prevention or elimination of discrimination in housing. Or D, the celebration by the purchaser of a new home. Right, C's, flood the chat box yet again. And open housing is a term around the elimination or prevention of discrimination in housing, or making housing open to all qualified individuals. All right, a sales agent is showing a married couple a one-bedroom apartment and informs them that the unit is not available for them because it is reserved for singles only. Singles only apartment building. Can you imagine? Which statute has the agent violated? A, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. B, none of these. C, the Federal Fair Housing Act. Or D, the Sherman Antitrust Act. All right, we are all in on C, the Federal Fair Housing Act, and it's actually B. Marital status is not covered under the Federal Fair Housing statutes. The familial status is. So congratulations, Sky, on getting that one through. Sherman Antitrust Act is an anti-monopoly act, so there's no monopoly involved here. And the Civil Rights Act prohibits racial discrimination. All right, John is charged with violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 because he discriminated against a woman while showing her a house. Which statement is true? A, John is guilty of discrimination. B, John may be charged in state court for a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. C, John is in violation only if he advertised the property is not available to women. Or D, John is not guilty of unlawful discrimination. All right, we've got A's, B's, C's, and D's for this question. So this is a tough one. All right, Sky doubling down on A. Let's see. We probably got more A's than anything else, so we'll go with that. But this is definitely one that we'll want to talk about. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1866 isn't going to cover gender, right? It is only race, color, and ancestry. So and this is an important thing, guys, for your test taking, for your test prep, and while you're taking the exam. We can only operate with the information that we get in the question, right? So, John is charged with this violation of the Civil Rights Act because he discriminated against a woman while showing her a house, right? We don't actually have enough information here to know whether or not John discriminated. We don't know if there was advertising involved. We do know that, and we don't know the race of this woman, right? And so what we do know is enough to know that the unlawful discrimination that is being suggested here, John would not be guilty of because they're invoking the Civil Rights Act and stating that it's a woman, right? Now, if it was the Federal Fair Housing Act, which does include gender, then that would be something different. But here, civil rights violation, can't say that it took place, so we got to say that he's not guilty. All right. A salesperson presents a full price offer from a financially qualified prospect who is Black. Later, the salesperson's broker presents a lower offer to the same seller from a prospect who is white. The seller accepts neither contract but sells to a neighbor through the same salesperson and broker who decides to buy the house to prevent a prospect who is Black from purchasing the property next door to him. Which party would not be subject to liability under the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968? A, the neighbor, B, the seller, C, the prospect, or D, the salesperson. Which party would not be subject to liability under the Federal Fair Housing Act? All right, I see the C's in the chat box, and that's correct. Nobody is allowed to discriminate, licensed or otherwise. The neighbor, the salesperson, the seller, all part and parcel to what could be viewed as discriminatory behavior. The person who just submitted an offer, as the man off the street, is not liable, right? Is no involvement with the transaction after his offer was not accepted. And so every other individual in the process would potentially have liability there based on their involvements. All right. Question number 9, if in the sale or rental of a house, a sales agent discriminates against an individual because of religion, the agent may be charged with discrimination under which statute? A, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, B, the Sherman Antitrust Act, C, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, or D, the Federal Fair Housing Act. All right, the D's flood the chat box, and that's going to be right, guys. Excuse me. As we said, Antitrust Act is around monopolies. The Equal Credit Act is around loan and credit for individuals not related to the sale of homes. Civil Rights Act is race, color, and ancestry. And then everything else is covered in the Federal Fair Housing Act. All right, a real estate agent owes a professional responsibility to the public to A, file income taxes in a timely manner, B, record deeds from transactions in which he is involved. C, disclose a client's confidential information. Or D, treat all parties honestly and fairly. Which is the obligation of every real estate agent to the public. And as you guys all threw D's in the chat box, treat everybody honestly and fairly, right? Just the old iteration of the do right rule. All right. Question number 11. Potential buyers believe that they have been discriminated against because of their race. Which option is available to buyers under the Federal Fair Housing Act? A, file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. B, complain to the Office of the Federal Housing Administration. C, file a lawsuit within 2 years and file a complaint with the Office of Equal Opportunity / HUD within 1 year. Or D, file a lawsuit in municipal court within 30 days. All right, everyone feels like it's C, and it is C. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, victims have the right to either file a complaint with the Office of Equal Opportunity or the HUD office within 1 year, or file a lawsuit within 2 years of the incident. All right, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 established which as a protected class? A, sex, B, age, C, race, or D, religion. All right, we have hammered this one plenty tonight. It is C, race. 1866 covers race, color, and ancestry. Sex and religion are a part of the Federal Fair Housing Act, and only the ECOA prohibits discrimination based on age. All right, in the 1968 landmark U.S. Supreme Court case of Jones versus the Alfred H. Mayer Company, it was ruled that A, sexual preference is now a protected class in fair housing laws. B, the Fair Housing Act is void. C, racial discrimination in the sale of any property is prohibited without exceptions. Or D, state law will take precedence over federal fair housing act. C's flood the chat box, and C is correct. This case interpreted the Civil Rights Act, not the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968. The Supreme Court found that when it comes to racial discrimination in the rental or sale of housing and personal property, there is no exceptions or exemptions, even though there were 4 exemptions in the 1968 Act. So no exceptions or exemptions on race. Which type of contract could a real estate agent lawfully create from scratch? A, none. B, a purchase agreement. C, a lease. Or D, a land contract. Make no bones about it, guys. You cannot create things from scratch as a real estate agent, right? That is a restriction. You cannot create contracts and documents for people to sign. Many states have imposed the canon of ethics, and the Board of Realtors promulgated the Code of Ethics in order to A, keep part-timers out of the business, B, ensure professionalism in the practice of real estate, C, generate revenue, or D, reduce the number of agents entering the profession. B is correct, to ensure professionalism in the practice of real estate. There are over 1.5 million realtors throughout the United States. And it is nice to know that there is a consistent code of ethics, which we are all bound, by which we are all bound. All right, back to the dashboard here, and we're going to dive right into law. And I believe we are looking for license law and the rules of the Ohio Real Estate Commission. So this is going to be state specific. So this is going to be a portion of your state exam. And there are only 3 or 4 sections on the state exam. And this is one of the largest. I think this one has 14 questions on your exam, and another section will have 16. And that's 30 of the 40 questions on your exam. All right. When would a license be considered inactive? A, when the broker dies. B, when the salesperson does not do a transaction in the mandated period of time. C, when the salesperson directs the broker to return their license to the division. Or D, when the salesperson fails to turn in proof of CE. When would it be considered inactive? So inactive is going to be when is a voluntary status where you just say, hey, I don't want to have an active license. The failure to turn in your CE is going to lead to suspension. There is no mandatory amount of transactions that have to take place for your license to remain in good standing. And when the broker dies, there's a few different things that can happen there. So again, with the information we have in the question, the correct answer is C. All right. A broker receives a client's earnest money check and deposits it into his trust account. Okay. Prior to closing, however, the broker needs money to pay monthly overhead expenses. He borrows the money from the trust account, fully intending, of course, they always are fully intending to replace it before the closing. The broker is guilty of A, condemnation, B, conversion, C, misrepresentation, or D, commingling. So a lot of D's in the chat box. Let me ask you this question. Did he commingle the funds? No, he did not. Commingling the funds is where you take money that should go into the trust account and you put it in a personal account. You're mingling or commingling your personal and professional funds. So he put it in the right account. He just used it for the wrong thing. So he converted that trust account, or converted the monies from the trust account to operating expenses. And so conversion is going to be the correct answer there. He converted the funds for personal use. He did not commingle the funds. It is nuanced, and it will be a question on your exam, the difference between conversion and commingling. All right, what is the maximum number of DBAs, or doing business as names, a broker is allowed to operate under? A, no more than 3, B, only 1, C, no more than 5, or D, no more than 2. C is correct. 5 is the limit for DBAs. Why you need to know that, I don't know, but you do. It's one of those things. It's like, how many square feet are in an acre? 43,560 square feet. You're going to need to know it, I promise you. You're going to need to know it for the exam. You will not need to know that for your real estate career. A buyer makes an offer to buy a house and faxes the offer, right? People don't fax offers anymore, but in this scenario, they do. Fax the offer to the seller in another state. The seller, upon receipt, signs the offer, intending to mail it back to the buyer the next morning. In the meantime, the buyer telephones the seller and withdraws the offer. What is true here? A, there is no contract as the acceptance has not been delivered to the buyer. B, there was never a rightful offer as the offer was faxed and the seller must receive the original offer. C, there is no contract, or sorry, there is a contract as the seller has accepted the buyer's offer. Or D, both parties are now bound by the terms of the contract. All right, we have a substantial number of A's in the chat, and so we will go with A, and that is going to be correct. There is no contract here because acceptance was not delivered. Now, you will get a version of this question where instead of intending to mail it, they put it in the mail, flag up, stamped. That's called the mailbox rule. The mailbox rule takes effect once it is in the mailbox, meaning that it is acceptance has effectively been delivered. And so if this was in the mailbox instead of intended to be mailed, the answer would be different. All right. Under the Ohio Real Estate Recovery Fund, the commission shall impose a fee not to exceed $10 annually on each licensee filing a notice of renewal if the recovery fund is less than A, 3 million, B, 500,000, C, the commission may impose $10 at any time, or D, 2 million. All right, B's fill the chat, and we will have it be B. So if it's less than 500,000, you can do $10 a year, up to $10 a year. It can not be above $5 if it is between 1 and 2 million. And if it is over 2 million, there will be no assessments, no special assessments are allowed. When must a broker record a written release or satisfaction of the broker lien in the county recorder's office in which the lien was recorded? When must a broker record a written release or satisfaction of the broker lien? A, within 90 days after the owner satisfies the claim. B, within 10 days of the owner satisfying the claim. C, the owner must file the release of lien after the claim has been satisfied. Or D, within 15 days. Natalie says B. Oh, it's now updated to B. Within 10 days, says the group, and that is correct. The Ohio Revised Code says that you got to do it within 10 days. All right, question number 7. A buyer makes an offer on a property. The seller issues a counteroffer, which the buyer signs and the selling agent delivered to the listing agent. The buyer passes a FSBO and likes it better. He makes an offer on the FSBO and the seller accepts. Which is true? A, both contracts are valid. B, neither contract is enforceable. C, only the first contract is valid. Or D, the contract on the first house is not enforceable. What do we think here, gang? Some B's and some A's. Some B's and some A's. Looks like more A's than B's, so we'll go with that. And that is correct. This buyer just bought himself 2 houses. The opportunity to enter into contract is not predicated on not being under contract elsewhere. If that was the case, it would be really hard for investors to acquire a lot of properties. So you can be under contract on as many properties as you want. All of you had offer, acceptance, delivery, all of that has taken place. So yeah, your guy's buying 2 houses, or gal for that matter. All right, question number 8. A buyer makes an offer to purchase a house and gives the seller until midnight, 3 days hence, to accept the offer. Prior to acceptance, the buyer withdraws. What is true? A, there is no contract since the buyer made an offer. Or there is a contract. Damn it, sorry about that. There is a contract since the buyer made the offer. B, the buyer is allowed to withdraw the offer prior to acceptance. C, the buyer may not withdraw the offer. Or D, the buyer must wait until the end of 3 days to withdraw the offer. And I see. All right, plenty of B's in there, so we're going to go with that. And that's true. The buyer can withdraw, rescind the offer at any time that they want to before acceptance, right? So they said, hey, you got 3 days to do with this. And then they wake up the next day and they're like, you know what? No, I'm out. They can do that. They can rescind or withdraw that offer at any time prior to acceptance. All right, after recording an affidavit of lien with the recorder's office, the broker shall provide a copy of the lien affidavit where the contract for sale or the conveyance of the lien property has been entered into to the A, superintendent, B, the owner of the lien property and prospective transferee, where known, C, the prospective transferee, or D, the owner of the lien property. Who gets notification after the recording of the affidavit of lien? Right, D's have loaded up our chat box. And it's going to be both parties, the owner of the lien property and the prospective transferee, if and where known. So you tell everybody whenever this happens. All right. Homosexuality is protected under what federally protected class? A, national origin. B, it is not protected under any federally protected class. C, sex, or D, familial status. All right, B is correct. There are local ordinances in some cities, but federally, there is no protection under any federally protected class. Question number 11, who administers the real estate license law? A, the police. B, the Division of Real Estate. C, the Real Estate Commission. Or D, the Department of Commerce. Who administers the real estate license law? All right, we got some B's and C's in the chat, but it looks like more C's, so we'll go with the commission. And it is the division. So anything related to your license, its suspension, its inactivity, its issuance, anything related to your license is going to go through the Division of Real Estate, right? When you apply to sit for your exam, Division of Real Estate. You want to put your license inactive, you want to transfer your license, you get suspended, who do you send your CE to? The division, the division, the division. All right. Question number 12. An agent wishes to specialize in the sale of commercial property. What should they do? Choose the best answer. I apologize because questions like this are always pretty crummy, but they should A, stay with the same brokerage. B, seek additional education in order to be licensed to sell commercial property. C, find a broker who specializes in the sale of commercial property. Or D, must have done at least 20 residential transactions to sell commercial property. What is the best answer? I will tell you, it is question. I will tell you that B your license is an Ohio Division of Real Estate salesperson's license, allows you and is good for transacting any real estate, commercial, residential, vacant land, anything. Your license allows you legally within the state to sell commercial property. So you do not need to seek additional education to be licensed to sell commercial. You do not have to have a minimum number of residential transactions to sell commercial. So B and D are both wrong, or because they're simply not true. So depending, I think the answer that they want you to pick here is find a broker that specializes in the sale of commercial property. And that's good, great, and wonderful, and may very well be what you should do depending on what brokerage you're at. If you have an interest in an opportunity to sell commercial property with our brokerage, Keller Williams Greater Metropolitan, you will be able to with the assistance of one of our commercial brokers or commercial specialists, right? So you will get to do that. You can do that here. So I would say if you're with our company, you should stay with the same brokerage. But if you are interested in specializing in that and your brokerage did not allow you to do that, oh shit, I guess I was right the whole time. Ohio license law says there's no distinction between that, and you could sell commercial at whatever brokerage you want. So the correct answer was A, stay with the same brokerage, which is what I always recommend. Don't know how I got that one wrong, but good thing I've already passed the test. All righty. How many hours of continuing education are required by an Ohio licensee over a 3-year period? Is it A, 20, B, 26, C, 35, or D, 30? How many hours on the 3-year version? So it's 20 hours of post-licensing education in your first year, and then it is 30 hours every 3 years. 30 hours of continuing education every 3 years. The 20, right? 20 is correct for what is the post-licensure requirements in your first year. So before your first year, you've got to knock out 20 hours of post-license education, 30 hours of continuing education qualified CEs in every 3 years. All right, if the superintendent pays any amount from the recovery fund in settlement of a claim toward the satisfaction of a judgment against the licensed broker or salesperson, A, the license of the broker or salesperson is automatically revoked. B, the salesperson or the broker pay a fine of $2,500. C, the license of the broker or salesperson is automatically suspended. Or D, there is no action taken, as the fund is meant to protect the public. All right. There's an automatic suspension, and it will be reinstated whenever they repay the amount plus interest to the recovery fund. All right, we're going to sneak in one more question here, and then we will wrap it up for this evening. A buyer is going to make an offer on a seller's home. The listing agent asks the buyer for $1,000 in earnest money, but the buyer doesn't want to give $1,000 in earnest money. The listing agent says it's state law. What statement is true? A, earnest money set by federal law. B, the buyer must give $1,000 in earnest money. C, earnest money is set by state law. Or D, the listing agent is wrong. All right, you guys must have been listening earlier when I talked about this, or you just know it dead to rights. There is no earnest money amount required by law. Earnest money is always negotiable by the buyer and seller. All right, guys. If you could, quick question. What is the other section? Oh, Antonio, you beat me to it. I am going to drop all of these in. I'm going to drop all of these. Let me get the exam breakdown for you all so that you can see what's going on here. I'm going to put it in the chat box, so make sure you get into the chat box So this is for the national exam, this first set of numbers that I'm giving you. And so you can see contracts, general principles of agency, and practice of real estate make up 35 of the 80 questions on the national exam. And then there are only 3 sections on the, state governance. I don't think is, state governance should go with state. And there are 4 sections: state governance, and license requirements, license laws and rules, and brokerage relationships. Those 4 sections make up the state and national exam. So to pass the state exam, you need to get 28 out of 40 questions right to pass the national exam. You need to get 56 of the 80 questions correct. And again, 35 of the 80 questions are going to come from contracts, practice, real estate, and general principles of agency, as well as on the state side, 75% of your questions are going to come through license laws and rules, and brokerage relationships. So if you were going to spend time focused on anything, anywhere, by all means, focus on the big meaty ones. You do not need to know leasing and property management to pass the exam. All right, guys, I will ask you one more time if you are scheduled to take your exam, just drop the date in the chat box. We would love to wish you well and cheer you on and celebrate with you when you pass. And to do that, we would need to know when you're taking the exam. And if for any reason you think that we do not have your contact information, specifically your cell phone number, go ahead and drop that in the chat box as well, just to confirm. Otherwise, that is all we have in store for tonight. We will be back on next Monday. I'll see you guys in November, and look forward to helping you continue to prepare and making you all licensed realtors prior to 2022. Let's do this.